I'm feeling a little overexposed with you all today, so hopefully we'll keep this lively and new. But yes, I was asked to come talk about team and standards and how do they connect, how do they relate. By way of agenda, I thought I would talk a little bit about team, some of the changes that were made this year, some of the focus areas for continuing development, and then because we touched on a number of things earlier today about standards, what I actually thought we would do is look at some assessment items and how is one standard assessed in 5 different ways, just so we can see a real mental picture of what that looks like and what are some of the differences in assessments. And then in terms of the focus areas that we outlined earlier today, I want to share with you some of the latest department research on, for example, writing. What correlated with stronger writing results? So we'll talk about some of that. And as Candace indicated, I will do my best to keep it as relevant as possible. I'm going to invite questions throughout. I know I get you all after your coffee break, which has the early sugar spike and then the crash. So feel free to stand up if you are tired of sitting and ask questions, and we'll keep this engaged. Broadly speaking, some of you may have seen this sort of framework before, but there are 2 major reforms sweeping the nation when it comes to education. Higher standards for kids, higher standards for adults. And there's often questions about how do these 2 initiatives relate to each other. And I find this kind of an interesting question. Jared Myrickle at the back definitely invented this graphic, and I will give credit where credit is due as he sees it. But I do think that for those of us who are sort of in the trenches doing this work every day, and mainly for the teachers and leaders that we get to work with, these do not feel disconnected at all. They feel incredibly reinforcing and important to have together. And so I think the silos are often in our head. But we do want to address, okay, so how does teacher evaluation relate to Common Core? And we have been talking about it in terms of what we teach, how we teach, and why we teach. That evaluation outlines how we teach, a vision of excellence for what that looks like. That the Common Core state standards and higher standards really define a vision of excellence for what we teach, and together it supports why we teach, which is to help children. And so these are mutually reinforcing. A few updates on team. We have seen the teacher satisfaction with team increase fairly dramatically over the past few years, but there's still undoubtedly a long way to go. We've seen it increase just in terms of overall satisfaction and in terms of fairness and perception of this is a fair process to me. We've also said from the start that evaluation needs to be a living thing, and that every year, based on data and based on feedback, we need to take a look at the evaluation system and make changes, make small changes and consider big changes as well. So as you all prepare your candidates, I would hope that you all prepare them to encounter evaluation as a living thing, to know that the rubric is not fixed, to know that the rubric will change. And I think that's important because we are so used to these sort of sea change reforms in education. It's all about this, and then it's all about this over here. And to the contrary, with team, we really want to make sure that it gets better every year and that we're creating something that's living. So some of the changes that we made this year, one was we increased the rigor of the certification exam for evaluators. We've added more support through the core offices for they're called evaluation coaches to work with principals. We did make some tweaks to the instructional rubric, and that was based largely on the feedback of core coaches and leadership coaches. Tweaks like incorporating some of the language of assessing and advancing questions, which has been a real focus in our training, into the actual rubric. We also made some tweaks. What we did is we asked teachers that were deeply involved with Common Core implementation, what feels resonant, what feels dissonant, and what's missing. And based on that feedback, we shifted and made some tweaks to the rubric. We added a world language assessment option and are continuing to try to add additional assessment options for teachers in non-tested grades and subjects. The biggest change was the legislative change around the weighting for teachers in non-tested grades and subjects. And we do have many districts incorporating student surveys in new ways. And even if small, I think that incorporation is just psychologically really powerful to teachers who know that their students' voice will be an important perspective in their evaluation. We also outlined a few areas that we said we're going to continue to look at this. One is around professional development. And while I think teachers, given that we all survived the first year of evaluation, lived to see another day, felt like, okay, maybe this isn't only about something that's out to get me, I still don't think we're realizing the potential of evaluation as a professional development tool and making real connections. Okay, if I'm not good at this thing, and okay, I can accept that I'm not going to be good at everything, then how do I get better? And I think that is really the question for this next chapter. To make a connection to your work, I think there is something critically important, not only in terms of dispositions, but also in terms of skill, about how do you develop yourself as a professional. And I think sometimes we skip that. So creating an expectation that is not based on perfection, and then an expectation that as you learn new things, you will need to get better. And how do you do that, I think, is another key competence. We have also explored use of videos, and there are a number of districts that are playing with different models of who evaluates, so more peer evaluation, for example. We also are continuing to study the 15%, the achievement measure. That continues to be the most challenging measure to set goals around, to evaluate fairly. And this coming year, we will have a new principal evaluation model. So we've had 2 years of having reports at the end of the year of evaluation, and you can expect to see that again this summer. The other thing that we will be looking at is which rubric rows are most aligned to TVAS. Do we find that teachers who are particularly strong at questioning and academic feedback, their students grow more? And do we find that a rubric row in planning is actually completely unrelated to TVAS scores? And so all of that research will continue to feed into tweaks to the rubric over time. We did identify through the leadership course what we've come to call the core 4. And I would say these are the competencies that teachers are struggling with the most, and that seem to be related most directly to a successful implementation of higher standards. So questioning, thinking, problem solving, and academic feedback. That may or may not resonate with your experience of your candidates, but this is certainly where we're seeing teachers need the most focus and attention. So quickly on standards, and then we'll open it up. I don't have this printed for you all, so I'll read things that are small, but here's an example of a 4th grade math standard. And what I thought we'd do is take one standard and look at 5 ways of how it's assessed. And earlier, I mentioned that I think we all actually understand standards best through their assessments by really looking at what is expected of student work. And I found this particularly powerful to review. So this is a standard. Understand a fraction a over b with a greater than 1 as a sum of fractions 1 over b. Understand addition and subtraction of fractions as joining and separating parts referring to the same whole. Decompose a fraction into sums of fractions with the same denominator in more than one way, recording each decomposition by an equation. Add and subtract mixed numbers with like denominators. For example, by replacing each mixed number with an equivalent fraction and or by using properties of operations and the relationship. And solve word problems involving addition and subtraction of fractions referring to the same whole and having like denominators. So, the 5, I'll tell you, this first one is TCAP. I'm not going to tell you the others. Some of you may be able to infer which test, but This is our current assessment question related to the SPI that's related to the concept of fractions in 4th grade. Which mixed number is best represented by point X on the number line below? I think this is a fairly standard TCAP question. There are 4 choices. There's one fairly obvious distractor, 5 1/3. It's a fairly straightforward question. Juliana divided the parts of a number line from 0 to 1 into sections of equal length. She plotted point M on the number line as shown below. One of the following circles is shaded to represent a fraction that is equivalent to the number represented by point M. Which one? So interesting question. I have to tell you the truth. I find this one confusing. It's translating between shading and number lines, right? And then it's really about counting, and then some of them have different sized parts thrown in there, like C. So in some ways that increases the rigor of the problem. You know, there's 5 choices as opposed to 4. This also only has 1 correct. I believe the right answer is E, but truthfully, so let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, so it's 3/4, so you'd have to figure out, no, that can't be it. It's D? It's D. Yeah. Is it? No. It's E. Yeah, it is E. Yeah, 3/4. Yep. Yeah, so you'd have to. So have a quick conversation at your tables. What skills does this question require? All right, let's come back together. Anybody want to share out any impressions about this item? There could be 2 correct answers. Well, I think B, if it's shaded white. One of the following is shaded. Yeah, that's interesting. Based on the wording of this question, I don't think they would get credit for B, but I think I understand what you're saying. Yeah. Right. So what does this get at? Yep. Great. So this gets at equivalence, right? And that 2 fractions can have the same value but be depicted in different ways. So, yep. Which is definitely more rigorous than this, right? But let's continue. So here's another assessment item for the same set of standards. Ava created this number line to graph 3 halves. Select the correct point on the number line to represent 3 halves. Mia created this number line to graph 5/6. Select the correct number line to represent 5/6. I do think a lot of students and even some teachers, when we give it, would put it right there. So this gets a little more complicated, just dealing with number lines, not dealing with shading, but having to translate from the numeral into an equivalent fraction, but depict that on the number line. Is 3 halves greater than or less than 5/6? Explain how you know. Write a fraction that is between 3 halves and 5/6. Explain how you know your fraction is between 3 halves and 5/6. So now have some discussion. What does this set of questions require for students? So let's come whole group. What does this require? It does require writing, which is different. What do students need to know to solve this? They have to think. They have to generate, right? So this is actually a machine scoreable question, but there's an infinite number of correct answers.
They have to understand how to articulate their thinking, so they have to be aware of their own cognitive process.
Yes.
And then to have the skill to
record that.
different things.
Yep. The Johnsons have a fence around their backyard that needs to be painted. Lonnie and Sandy spent all morning painting the fence. At lunchtime, 1/5 of the fence remains to be painted. What fraction of the fence did Lonnie and Sandy paint in the morning? Write an equation and draw a diagram to explain your answer. Lonnie painted 2/5 of the whole fence that morning. How much of the fence did Sandy paint? So I'll tell you, this one comes from our constructed response assessments. And it was, to be very upfront, the CRA was not designed as a summative. It was designed to be an instructional tool and to help teachers understand what the standards really look like and some methods of scoring it, and to see that there are multiple pathways to solutions. Somebody asked me earlier, so I can share whole group. I didn't mention the CRA in the assessment update because we will not be formally administering constructed response. However, we have about 48 tasks per grade level at this point, and we are encouraging districts, schools, and teacher preparation institutions to make liberal use of those. So we hope that they will continue to be of instructional benefit and value to help people really see different ways to assess. Final question, look at point P on the number line. Look at number lines A through E. Is the point on each number line equivalent to numbers shown by P? Choose yes or no. So this is a slightly different format. Goes back to equivalence, all demonstrating number lines. So I wanted to share those because I do believe assessments matter. And as a teacher, there's a really big difference between what I'm going to focus on to get my students to do this problem versus what I'm going to focus to get my students to do this problem. Teaching to this will rarely lead to this level of understanding. And so we do believe assessments matter. We believe we need great assessments in Tennessee. We believe that tests have a place in a broader instructional program, and that these choices are not sexy, right? Nobody's out there talking about, we need better tests really loudly in the political arena. It's not something that's popular to advocate for, but I do think it's worth advocating for, and it's worth taking very seriously. And when it comes to standards implementation, we have focused on what we've called the 3 legs of the stool. The first and foremost is around assessment, alignment, and transparency. The second is instructional materials and curriculum, and the third is training and support. And it's been our theory that if we don't do all 3 of these well, that this will be a giant binder replacement, right? That the standards transition will just become, oh, this is the new thing, but doing the same old thing in order to try and take on something new. And we really believe we do have to do things differently in order to improve student achievement. So that's been our focus and bolstered by leadership. By the end of the summer, we will have trained more than 55,000 educators at TNCore trainings. And we do know, we studied the impact of our training 2 summers ago, And many of you all know how hard it is to study professional development, right? You very rarely see significant impact, and we certainly did not go into this thinking we would see impact from a 3-day training. However, we found that the teachers who attended the training 2 summers ago, their students learned more even when you controlled for past growth trajectory and school experience than those who did not attend. So it does seem that there's some substance to this training that has made a real difference. But the other thing that we found is that their observation scores went up. And this really was kind of shattering the myth that there are these 2 separate initiatives that are unrelated. People who teach Common Core well do better on teacher evaluation, period. And we have found that from even just a few years of research. So we are offering training again this summer. We are focusing on math, content progressions, writing and literacy, basic math and writing pre-K through 2, and then we are re-offering all of our previous trainings. We are also offering math intervention and reading intervention and trainings to focus on the new social studies standards, and that will incorporate the literacy expectations. And I mentioned this earlier, but let me share a little bit of research about writing. For 2 years now, we've had a revamped writing assessment that is text-based. So in the past, the writing assessment prompts were things like, imagine a reason to celebrate and describe why you would celebrate. Or I think we actually had a question, imagine life as a raindrop. What would life as a raindrop be like? Not exactly college and career ready writing. And so we've revamped the writing assessment. And before students take the writing test, they take a very short survey, 10 questions, about their writing practices. Do you like to write? How often do you write? Do you write with a peer? Do you write an outline before you write? And it was very interesting because at every single level, at sort of the below basic level, the proficient level, the advanced level, students who said they did 3 things did better on that writing test than students who said they did not do those 3 things. And nobody who studies research will be surprised by this, but it was they write with their peers. They work with their peers on their writing. They write an outline before they write, and at least once a month, they write in subjects other than English. So students who said, yes, I do that, did better than students who didn't do that. Fairly actionable research that we can put to use, and we will be highlighting in our trainings. And then in math, we know that the sort of weakest staircase for knowledge is around that staircase to algebra. I think for a long time we thought in American education that patterns were the best predictor of algebra success. And we are number 1 in patterns in the world. We are number 1. We are not number 1 in algebra. And it turns out that fractions is actually a much stronger predictor of success with algebra and a much weaker area for our students. And when you look at some of the questions that we reviewed, you can see sort of the depth of understanding of fractions that and how it will prepare students for more abstract thinking down the line. Finally, basic math and reading. And so Common Core defines what we teach. Teacher evaluation defines how we teach. Together it supports why we teach. And that is the overview. So with plenty of time to continue, I thought I would just open it up for any questions that are on people's minds and, truthfully, any feedback, anything that you would like to share about things you think we need to be doing at the state to better support either these 2 specific initiatives or student success overall. Yes.
You know, many of us were in tech last year. You know, I remember Candace passed out some articles to us about Common Core. And, you know, I went back and read again on it was Robert Rothman, How We Got Here.
Mm-hmm.
It just, reading it, it just really, just a light bulb went on. You know, that journal article was written in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of warned in there that, you know, Common Core started in 2010 with the different, you know, lawmakers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and he was kind of predicting, by 2014, the elections where the legislature will be changed. And that will be, that will present the challenge about Common Core and assessment. And just reading it, realized that really happened. That, how afterward we learned from it that, wow, he knew it. And you guys go ahead and read that again. I mean, you'll be surprised.
Other questions? Right here. Come here and then I'll come up. Yep. This is not so much a question as a wish. In looking at the core 4 right there, I would love to see some training done specifically targeted to those 4 so that we can take them back into teacher prep and get a head start on training our folks to do this sort of thing.
Sure. If I can comment on that, I think that's very true. Everything we have done in state trainings for the past 2 summers has focused on those 4 areas. And it is my deep belief that it is not general pedagogy strategies in these areas, but content specific. And I would even venture grade specific, or at least grade band specific strategies that are going to make a difference. So our original math training focused heavily on I'd add one to the list, which is the selection of materials. And we do know in mathematics that the task that is selected does more to shape what students learn in that day than any other choice that the teacher makes. So that's why we started there. But we focused heavily on questioning and continued that theme. So we have focused on those, but I think for better or worse, they have sort of slightly different names because they are in content specific terms. And so the connection isn't maybe as obvious as we need to make it.
Yes, my question is, thinking about the comments by Assistant Commissioner Hassel this morning about special populations having a seat at the table, I was been asking a lot about the NICSID training across the state. One of my teachers, several of my teachers that piloted it this year, their students also had troubles with the fractions that you saw up there, and are really wanting some leadership and training. And as I see the trainings that are coming across or on 10 core, is there going to be additions for our students with the most significant cognitive disabilities, and really what's going on?
Yes, we are taking a very hard look at that as we speak. And we have included special populations teachers in all of our trainings from the start with 10 core. We've had people on our leadership council who bring that perspective early. I couldn't agree with Joey more. I think it is far too often that we bring in accommodations at the end of a conversation rather than up front, and we have made a lot of effort to make sure that we think about the standards as it applies to all students from the very start. But as you've asked a couple of times, NICSIC training is coming.
Okay,
So
because it's rolling out next year, and Common Core has
yes.
been pushed a lot across the years, except for our 1%. So it'd be great to kind of make a concerted effort for that.
I will say it again, it is coming. So
Other
I think
questions?
there was one question over here.
This goes back to the morning about the request for proposals and bids on the new assessment tools. I'm making an assumption it will be online something, and given that it will be online something, what is the state preparing to do to help with the implied curriculum of keyboarding at a very young age?
Yep. I'm so glad you asked this question for a number of reasons. First of all, I do think that's a fair assumption, and that doesn't come from any sort of insider knowledge on what the RFP is going to look like. That strictly comes from the fact that all tests are moving online. And it's the direct, I mean, your driver's test is online, and it's the direction the entire field is moving. Earlier today, I talked a little bit about the importance of deconstructing our own educational experience. And I'll tell you, it's keyboarding that has made me see the need for that almost more than anything else, because I think probably all of us grew up in a time when keyboarding did not have the same sort of civil right importance that it has to students today. And it is so important that children can use technology, because there are no jobs out there, and there are very few colleges I know of where people are longhanding anything. And yet in K-12, that's still the primary tool that we're using. And it's almost with sort of begrudging shock that people are like, but wait a second, we have to teach our children how to use keyboarding, we have to teach them how to type. And it's like, yeah, that's where the world is going. So definitely we have to do that. And to the specific question about sort of when and how and where, so the standards do call for very explicit expectations for when students will be able to do things with computers. So the English language arts standards in 3rd grade includes keyboard independently 1 paragraph, and in 1st grade includes with adult supervision interact with technology, and by 6th grade it advances from there. Some of you may have seen that the legislature directed the inclusion of cursive writing, and we are taking a look at that alongside the state board, but I think that we need to be looking holistically at how children learn to write by hand and how they learn to type, and we need to really revisit that progression hand in hand. Half of the battle there is, of course, just getting devices into classrooms and into students' hands, and that's not an insignificant challenge. We have seen extraordinary progress in very little time in schools being ready. We administered the writing test online this year, and 497,000 students in Tennessee took the writing test online. We had a small glitch day 1, figured out the glitch, fixed it, and the rest of the window it went fine. So I think there's a little bit of we just have to burn the boats on the beach and move forward and say we're headed in this direction and we're going to figure it out together. But by 3rd grade, students need to be able to independently type. And we're not there yet, but I'm confident we can get there. I will also tell you, we had this year during TCAP a number of students write us letters and say, why can't we take the TCAP on a computer? Like they're asking for it. And I will tell you, students with disabilities in particular can tell that the accommodations on the computer are way better than the accommodations they get paper pencil, and are asking for read aloud to be on headphones hooked up to a computer. So our students are like way past us on this issue, and we just need to figure out how to get there together.
Great question. Other questions? Okay, I have one that I was thinking about when you were talking about the changes in the team evaluation and updates based on the surveys that you've given to teachers and feedback you've received. Can you talk to us about the area on the team evaluation that appears to be the most problematic, particularly for new teachers? Are you able to, disaggregate to that kind of data where we would know what are teachers really struggling with in their first couple years according to results of the team evaluation?
So I don't have it at my fingertips in the way that I wish to answer this question, but not only have we looked at it in terms of years of experience, we've also looked at it in terms of subject and grade level. And I'll tell you, it's very interesting because our high school teachers are struggling with very different things than our elementary school teachers are struggling with. And we're very lucky at the department to have a great research and evaluation team. Nate Schwartz leads that team, and they have produced, if you get a chance, TN Classroom Chronicles is our blog, and we share all of the research through that. Again, it's tnclassroomchronicles.org. And I don't have like it's this indicator. I think we do tend to see, which is very standard to what everyone expects, newer teachers struggling with management issues more than teachers with more years of experience. I think the question there is it something we can do in pre-service to help them, or is it a natural learning curve that just needs to be supported and shortened if possible? But it really is the meaty academic distinguishers of those core four that we're seeing kind of split the crowd when it comes to effectiveness.
One follow-up question to that: when you transitioned to the CRAs and got the feedback on the writing, I thought it was interesting you've shared as a state things that were problematic from the CRAs. Can you remember what some of those are
Yes.
as we take that back and work on those things?
Yes, I can. So we produced a few memos on this as well. They are available on TINCOR. In math, in CRA, and then I can talk about writing. In math, now bear in mind the CRA, we're only assessing what we called the focus standards for each year. So this doesn't represent sort of the topics across all of the subjects that were most important. But we found in third grade it was distributive property. Students really struggled with multiple representations of distributive property. We actually focused on that in our leadership course with principals this past year, and principals really struggled with distributive property as well. It's not something that we use regularly in our lives, it turns out, but it's the basis of factoring, which becomes very important for algebra. And then in fourth and fifth grade, for students with fractions, certainly we found models, representing fraction situations with models was a difficulty for students, particularly when it came to multiplication. Like, how do you represent something pictorially, like 1/2 times 3/4? Really critical abstract skill, but really hard. And I think most of our teachers were used to multiply across the top, then across the bottom, done. And then in middle school, for proportions and ratios, students particularly struggled when it was across multiple forms. So if they had to work with a table and a graph, or a table and an equation, that's when they were struggling more. And then in 8th grade, it was similar triangles and understanding the relationship between similar triangles and functions. So it was actually pretty interesting, the kind of information and patterns we could see. And also, those are very actionable things. If we get those things right, we're creating a stronger foundation. In writing, we saw tremendous trends. First of all, it's sort of heartbreaking, but 2% of our 8th graders got 4s across all 4 of the traits in writing. It's a 4-trait rubric. So again, that was 2% of our 8th grade students. And we did see consistently that we struggled with content more than form. So conventions and language and style, we did better, students did better. It was the structure of an argument, citing evidence. That's where students were really struggling. We'll have much more information about writing assessment as soon as those results come back this year.
I really appreciate you sharing that. And again, those reports are on the TINCOR site. As more of that data is posted, I think those are great things to share in our teacher prep programs around what are things that we are seeing new teachers struggle with, and can we strengthen that in our own programs.
We also tried to link to some tasks in those analyses. So when we looked at distributive property, what are 4 tasks that you can actually go do and see? And the other thing that we have tried to do, and I hope it's getting leveraged, and I hope you all are using it as much as you can and like, is we have tried to put out a lot of student work and a lot of graded student work, both on math and on writing. And there are 2 sets of scored student work on writing prompts that are text-based writing prompts, and it's such an easy way to help pre-service teachers really engage with the expectations of the standards. Incidentally, everything is on TINCOR. If you don't already know, some things are password protected due to the license agreements that we have around copyright, and the password is TN Education, and then fastest improving. is the password. I am pleased to share that the University of Pittsburgh is actually allowing us to take things out from behind the password wall, so those will be freely available, including available to your colleagues around the country if you want to share those, hopefully in the next month.
Right, and at some of our last trainings, we did note that those things are available to you and your students, and so you can share that for the teacher, prep community, and higher education. Thank you very much, Emily. Let's give her a hand for our presentation and
Thank
questions.
you. Candace, can I mention one
Yeah.
last thing before I
Please,
duck
please.
out? Because you haven't heard from me enough today. I just wanted to share with you that, we have trained a lot of people, and what is so interesting to me is the powerful, consistent, and overwhelming support that they have for the standards. 94% of the people who have attended training think that this will help students. We never see results like that in education, where, we fight like cats and dogs about everything, but up and down the line, there is just profound and deep support for the standards, and I hope that we can, there are politics around it, there's no doubt about that, but the voice of our teachers, which you will hear next, is very strong on this subject.
Thank
you.
you again.